What's going on, guys? My name is Arrow, and in today's video we are going to be discussing my Ice Shot Totem Deadeye build. Stay tuned.
You cannot escape Vader's gaze.
Yo, this build is sick. Oh, we can only damage with attacks. Alright, let's talk about what makes this build fantastic and amazing to play. So number one, it is cheap to get started and scales really well with currency. The version that I have now, I have a +2 arrows bow with high DPS that I crafted myself. I've got a great Watcher's Eye. Lots of ways to upgrade this build to spend a lot of currency on it. You can also get it started for pretty cheap. If you took the 2 arrows off my bow, which is what makes it so expensive, it's maybe a 100C bow, and you only lose about 9.5% damage for your barrage. It's really not that important to have plus arrows. I wanted to craft one, so I spent a bunch of currency on it. A lot of this gear can be had for 20, 30, 40C. They're just rares with some life and resists on them, a couple of cheap uniques. We really did not go overkill on the gear here outside of the bow that I crafted myself. So it really is not that hard to get this thing going. Number 2, this is a fantastic bosser. You put your totems down, you point blank on the boss, and your barrage just deletes bosses. It's really fantastic to play and makes bossing pretty easy. Number 3, it's really good for sanctums. So freeze is probably the best mechanic that you can get in sanctums. So we have almost perma-freeze on guards. It depends on what mods you have on the sanctum and how close your totems are, because we have point blank. So obviously if they're really close, they're going to perma-freeze. If not, sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. Depends on the mods. But very good because you can put your totems down and move. Also for the trap rooms, you can put your totems down to block the projectile balls, and it makes it really easy. As you saw in the footage, this deletes the bosses in Sanctum. The final boss that I did had really hard mods and didn't even make it past the first phase. So no problem there. And number 4, it's actually a really good mapper. And I don't mean it's a good mapper for a totem build, I mean it's a good mapper. I've been playing this build for about a week now, and it's been hard for me to stop playing it and roll off into something else. I usually have a good time with a build for a couple days and then I'm done, but I've been enjoying this so much that I just couldn't put it down. It's an actually good mapper. I would say this is a truly all-content build. As much as it shines at one thing, it shines at another. I did not try Uber bosses with it because I don't do Uber bosses anymore. I basically just do them for a challenge if I have to, but I don't enjoy them. They're not profitable. You guys can flame me in the comments below for that, but unless you're going to do 200 Uber Mavens, you could do 10 of them and just lose all your money. So I don't do Uber bosses, but If you wanted to, you could definitely get the damage higher and do probably all Ubers with this. But as is, destroys everything in the game very, very easily. All right, so here we have our level 95 Deadeye. This build, as is not tanky. It is tanky in the way that totem builds are tanky, in that you don't have to stand still ever to do damage. You get to constantly move around and dodge. And we have a couple of really, really good defensive layers that go well with manually dodging. So we'll get into those in a bit. But you could make this tankier. You're going to lose some damage, obviously, but you could change this build around to make it a little bit tankier. So we have evade cap with our Flasks up, and pretty close without it up. We have 100% spell suppression, and we have really high move speed, which is an incredible defensive layer to go along with freeze. You freeze an enemy, he was targeting one place, and when he unfreezes, you're already across the screen on the other side. So freeze and movement speed are actually really, really underrated defensive mechanics that don't show up in the EHP numbers on POB, which seem to be the new Bible for POB reviewers that you'll find on the internet. EHP is very misleading. I just, for the first time since I became a creator, put away a build that failed. Because I put 40 divines into it and it just didn't feel good to play. It deleted bosses, it was a decent mapper, but it just didn't feel good. I had huge armor, evasion, 85 max res, block, spell block. I had so many defensive layers, but I had to stand still to cast. And because of that, I died all the time and it felt horrible to play. Feeling is more important than EHP because this build does not have high EHP and it is so much tankier than the build that had 90,000 EHP. So we'll move on from that topic, but please, please, please do not judge a build by its EHP number. I feel like the more that we talk about that number, the more misconstrued it gets as kind of the holy grail. All right, let's get into the build. So we will talk about the gear first, and we'll talk about some of the mechanics as we go through. So we have this bow, which is pretty crazy. We crafted this ourselves. We used essences to get cold damage until we hit something good. We hit Merciless here, and then we were able to slam on a tier 6 fizz. This took us a bunch of tries. We crafted a few omni bows in the process. So if you're gonna craft a bow, be prepared to spend some money. You can buy a very cheap bow with these numbers on them, except for additional arrows, for very, very cheap. So I actually don't recommend getting an additional arrow bow, or at least not a 2 additional arrow bow, because it's so much more expensive and the damage returns are not worth it. I crafted this for fun. I did have a lot of fun. I made some omni bows in the process. I don't recommend going for +2. I would say get something that looks similar to this with increased fizz, and flat cold, and then crit chance and attack speed for suffixes, and get 1 additional arrow or none. And you'll be much happier. You could spend 100 C instead of, 60, 70 divines, whatever this is worth. I have no idea. We'll move on to the helmet. This is the most important piece of the build. Ancestral Bond on Wilma's Requital gives us 1 totem. And most importantly, it gives us increases and reductions to cast speed, also applied to attack speed. There's been a lot of debate about how this works, but we have confirmed Frenzy Charges and Onslaught both work with this line. So Frenzy Charges give you 4% more damage, and they also give you 4% increased cast speed and 4% increased attack speed. So we get essentially 8% attack speed because those both count for us. And also Onslaught, which works the same way, gives you move speed, cast speed, and attack speed. Well, that cast speed is then turned into attack speed. We use the Raider Jewels, which we'll get to in a bit, that also synergize with this. So we get tons of attack speed. We attack really, really fast. As you can see, even with none of our frenzies up or anything, we attack really, really quick. Our amulet is the Replica Hiri's Truth. This is a couple C amulet. I got a perfect roll for not that much. This allows us to get free cull for our totems. It gives us huge mana reservation efficiency for hatred. And we don't actually use the level 22 hatred on here. We use hatred in our bow connected to enlighten because these actually stack additively together. We have our enlighten support on our hatred and this increased mana reservation efficiency. I actually believe it's multiplicative, not additive, but they do stack together. We anointed Shaman's Dominion for crit chance and crit multi. Our quiver, it gives us life, 1 additional arrow, again, Scaling arrows is nice, but it is not mandatory. I would recommend getting a couple, but it's not necessary to get a lot. And then just some damage, some multi, some flat damage. This is not a very good quiver. I could have done much, much better, but this was cheap. I think ADC I paid for this, so we took it all the way to endgame. Our rings, you want to have minus mana cost on both rings. One of the big challenges of the build is getting your mana cost low enough, because it's hard to get mana recovery without using a life flask on a ranger. So we have big res here and intelligence, a little bit of life. That's about it. We also get big res and life and intelligence on our other jewel. We're on a little bit overkill on intelligence. We got really high rolls that we don't necessarily need, and these resist rolls are really high as well. If we would have gotten better boots and better gloves, we wouldn't have needed to get so much on the rings. So you just kind of balance that out where you can, but definitely got to have the minus mana cost. So here we have attack speed, which is actually not that good anymore because we have so much attack speed. This roll is not amazing. We hit rarity. We actually crafted these ourselves, and lightning, and then just some damage and life. As far as the prefixes are concerned, a little more attack speed and spell suppress to get us to 100. On our boots, we have strength. We need one strength roll somewhere in our gear. And then we have more res, movement speed, and life. Nothing too crazy, but the implicits, Fizz is extra cold. It's okay, it's not amazing. And then I had brittle ground on here, which I was using when my crit chance was lower. Now my crit's capped. I actually recommend going Scorch here. It's a big, big damage boost. So I would get Scorch Ground while moving. You can get Scorch Ground while near a unique enemy. You really only need it for bosses. So you basically put your totems down, run through the boss, and the boss dies before the 5 seconds is even up. Our belt, again, just resists, a little bit of life. Yeah, elemental damage with attack skills roll is pretty low, so not that relevant, but something like this. And then we just have a life and corrupted blood jewel in the Stygian. Go over the flasks. We have a Jade Flask with mana cost on it. So when we are casting our totems without it, we can cast them at this pace, which is about all you need. None of our other skills cost mana. Creeping Frost, Frenzy, none of these cost mana. So the only thing we're using mana for is this. Now, when you're mapping, you actually spam a lot more totems than you do when you're bossing, because as you run through the map, you just click, 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 just dropping them everywhere. So I found it more comfy to use a minus mana cost. So we're at 12 right now, and when we hit this, we are at 4 mana cost, and you can spam these indefinitely at that. There's a lot of different things you can do to solve mana on this build. This is how I've chosen to do it, but make it your own. Our next flask is the Quicksilver with critical strike chance on it. And then we have a crit chance with evasion flask here. The life flask, and then Dying Sun. Dying Sun is 2 more proj. Again, it's good for clear. It helps with your barrage, but you don't need to scale as many projectiles as I did. I kind of went overkill to the point where the projectiles didn't even feel like they were worth it. We have a gem swap here, the barrage for hypothermia. We'll talk about that as we go through the gems. Our aura setup in the bow is Grace, Hatred, Haste, Precision, and an Enlighten. The Grace is just great for getting us to our evade cap, which we do get to. Haste and Vol Haste. We have Vol Haste on left click, so it's up every time we want it. If you want to save it for bosses, you absolutely can do that. Just take it off your left click and just press it. I have so much damage at this point that I don't really need it, so it doesn't bother me to have it on left click. Hatred, just huge damage for Fizz to cold builds, and then a level 20 precision. In the helmet, we have a Bone Chill setup with a Creeping Frost, a Divergent Bone Chill for increased effect, and Unbound Ailments. That 3 link, you basically just cast it, gives you a nice area if you have extra projectiles. That actually will chill the boss and make them take more damage. The Hydrosphere setup I have on like an alternative button. You basically can use this to generate frenzies before fights if you want to. It's not necessary. I started using this because I was worried I was going to die to Lycia when I first put this character together, but it really isn't necessary. When you're on the boss, you spam it a few times, you get full power charges and full frenzies within like a second. So it really isn't necessary, but it's in here because we had an extra socket. Our boots have our Flame Dash for movement, and then we have our Ensnaring Arrow and Frenzy setup. So we have Ensnaring Arrow and Frenzy both on our bar. You want to get at least 1 Ensnaring Arrow on the enemy to make them take increased projectile damage. It also slows them. And then Frenzy just gives us Frenzy on hit. Power Charge on crit means we generate power charges as well to give us more crit chance on bosses. If you just like every once in a while cast this while you're mapping, you'll have them up as well, but it isn't necessary. We have a level 1 Immortal Call with a cast from damage taken, just a little bit of defenses, and then a Sniper's Mark with Mark on hit, which we get from casting our Ensnaring Arrow or Frenzy. Our main 6-link is an Ice Shot Phantasmal Ballista Totem. This gives us a 10% chance to have projectiles return, which is just a little damage boost for single target. Awaken Cold Pen, increased critical damage. Divergent Hypothermia is nice. It's 4% cold pen, and awakened elemental damage with attacks. And when we do bosses, we swap out our hypothermia for a barrage setup for a ridiculous amount more damage. And that's it for the gems. For our Atlas passive tree, we'll talk about the Ascendancy first. So we get Ricochet, which is +1 chain, which is really, really nice for clear, but also really nice for the Sanctum, because you get projectiles can chain off of walls, which means you're going to be hitting your bosses a lot more when you kind of put your totems and let them fire around corners, especially if you're trying to do a no-hit run. 2 additional projectiles from Endless Munitions is really nice. Gathering Winds. So you and nearby allies have Tailwind. That includes your totems, but your totems don't get the effect of Gale Force. So Gale Force is just a bonus for you to make you go faster, and but it does not affect your totems. And lastly, Focal Point, Sniper's Mark. This is just an incredible node for Sniper's Mark. It makes enemies take way more damage, but also it makes your mark transfer to other enemies. So when you're mapping, if you cast your Frenzy a couple times and put the mark out, it'll just move the mark around from enemy to enemy in the pack as you kill them, which is really, really nice. So let's talk about the tree. We have 1 large cluster jewel, and what we're doing here is essentially allowing us to get our totem mediums. So our large cluster has Arcing Shot, which is critical strike chance as projectiles travel further. It's not amazing, but it's just like a little bit more damage. I actually started this build with Far Shot, which is why I got this. While you're mapping especially, arrows are going to be traveling pretty far. So this helps with crit chance, but it's not great. Then we have Martial Prowess, which gives us attack speed, attack damage, and accuracy rating, all very nice. For our mediums, we have a Repeater and Shrieking Bolts. This gives us more taunt. Taunt is really strong. When you put your totems down near an enemy, they'll taunt from a Mastery and also from Shrieking Bolts. And then on the other side, the most important one, we have Ancestral Reach, which is nice, but this Sleepless Sentries, it gives us Onslaught if you've summoned a totem in the last 4 seconds, which is going to be all the time. So you have permanent Onslaught, and then we use Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh from Raider, which gives us 100% increased effective Onslaught and more chance to evade attacks during Onslaught. So we are getting more than double effectives of Onslaught between this and some stuff on the tree, and that makes our totems attack really, really fast to go along with Wilma's Requital. On top of that, we get an absurd amount of move speed from our Onslaught effect, which makes this build a zoomy mapper, and we don't really have to invest too much into move speed outside of this. Here we have a Rain of Splinters, again, 2 more projectiles, so a bunch of projectile scaling is good for barrage. Our Watcher's Eye, this one was really expensive. I think I paid 10 divines for this. I wanted the crit chance. If you don't want to spend the money on this, just leave Brittle on your boots, and it basically more than solves this problem. Also, this 6% evade gets us to evade cap. There are other ways to get there, but this is the simplest way to do that. So if you want to spend 10, 12 divines, you can get a Watcher's Eye that looks just like this. We take all the totem stuff over here. Nothing too exciting there. We take these 3 points for Onslaught effect and Armor and Evasion. We grab the Spell Suppress nodes, grab the Frenzy nodes that are in range, because Frenzy nodes are really nice for us. Again, more totem stuff. And it really is not that complicated of a tree. You know, get a Corrupted Blood Jewel somewhere. I actually have 2 by accident. I never fixed that. But it's not super complicated, and it's pretty easy to put together. So lastly, we got to talk about the Relic. There are a lot of good relics that you can use in this build. This is the best one I had, and it actually really, really helps with solving the mana issue. If you don't have a minus mana cost of attack relic, you might have to do something else. So when I take this out, my totems are pretty expensive if I'm not using my flask. Now, if I use my flask, get my mana to full again. So if I use the flask, it's still pretty cheap to use, and you can spam these as needed, but you really want to get more mana cost reduction. There are also things on the tree. You could anoint Dreamer. That's really nice. There's a lot of different solutions depending on what you choose to do. But if you have a mana cost Relic, this is just so nice quality of life for the build. Worst case scenario, you drop the Dying Sun, which again, I think it's 9.5% more damage for these 2 projectiles. You drop the Dying Sun, you get a mana flask that has some good suffix on it, and you don't have to worry about getting the minus mana cost here. It just solves the mana issue for you by just filling up your mana with an Enduring Mana Flask. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please stop by my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. Don't forget the 2 underscores. I would be happy to help with any questions that you have. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care.